So sometimes I think we come to Jesus and we're looking for the wrong thing. I when I was growing up, the pastor who was the pastor at the church I grew up in for a long time had this phrase that still sticks with me, and he talked about humans as gimme pigs. Give me this, give me that, give me that, and I think on the one hand there is that continual lure to that which we don't have. To there's an entire advertising industry that's built around telling stories of, if you just have this in your life will be complete. And then you have that. And then you see the next story that says, but really what you need is this in your life to be complete. But I think it's more than that. I think for a lot of us, it's not only that we don't have enough of other things. I think a lot of times we don't feel like we're enough. I'm not smart enough, or I'm not handsome enough, or pretty enough, or fast enough, or strong enough, or wealthy enough, or educated enough, and sometimes we just have to say enough of enough. And I think sometimes a lot of this, to me, goes back to, not being thankful for that which we have. And I think that's hard in our world today, because we constantly see put before our faces what everybody else has. There's always been that idea of keeping up with the Joneses, but now it's around us 24/7 of exactly what someone else wants us to see of their life. And so, you see who's going on vacation at this point, or who's going to this show or that show, and you're like, wow, I wish I had their life, not knowing what the rest of their life is like. And I think sometimes that we forget all the things that God does give us. I think we lose sight of what God does provide for us. And I think we always sit there and say, well, but this is not enough. And yet, we have that which we need. So often we really do. We have that which we need. We have, one of the pieces of both the reading from Exodus, but also this bread of life long piece, is that really all that we have, all that we are, all that we need, it all comes from God. That God is the one who provides these things. It's not Moses. It's not anybody else. It's not that, whether it's our work, whether it is our food, whether it's our homes, whether it's our families, these are all gifts that God gives us, God provides for us. And I think sometimes when we, I know that there are sometimes people who are dealing with legitimately not having enough food, not having a sustainable income, not having all those things. But I think when we actually do have enough, that sometimes we get tricked into believing it's not enough. And then we begin to grumble about what God has provided for us. I, your pastor, am not immune to this. I will be the first to say I am not immune to this. So this is one of those things I have to fight with again and again and again. The reason that we have those commandments at the end of the Ten Commandments about not coveting, that which is your neighbor's property or goods or relationships or all these other things. We all need to hear those things, and we all wrestle with those things. We all, I think, wrestle with that sense of gratitude. And when I was in my second congregation that I served, I was in again, I wasn't that far out of seminary. I still had a lot of debt. I was the only person in my household working, and I was serving in Edmond, Oklahoma. Edmond, Oklahoma, just outside of Oklahoma City, is an area where there is a lot of oil money. And so I was not the poorest person in my congregation, but I was pretty close. And so I would go and I would visit people in their homes, and a couple $1 million home, and just be looking around. And it's like it's hard to be in that situation and say, you know what? Well, oops, wrong button. I never visited a home like that, but a few that were reasonably close, and it was one of these things you go in, it's like, wow, here's to where I'm living, and here's where someone else is living, and you begin to ask those questions. Well, is there something wrong with me, or did I do something wrong? And I think sometimes, there are certainly times where you see Christianity presented to where Jesus becomes more like Santa Claus than Jesus. I don't know about anybody else's experience growing up, but I certainly, had that experience where I made that list, and I was looking for all those things on Christmas morning when I came down and woke up my parents way too early, and came down and, okay, did I get this? Did I get this? Did I get this? Did I get the pony and the hippopotamus? And never got those. I never wanted a pony or a hippopotamus anyway, but those are just kind of some of the classic ones. But it was one of those things of, here are all these things. If you give me this, I will know that you love me. I did not realize how much stress I was putting on my parents at that point. Sometimes being a parent makes you realize some of that. But it's one of those things of, hey, I have all these expectations, and if you give me all of this, then I will know that you really, really love me. And I think sometimes we treat God like that. That God, if you do all these things for me, then I'll follow you. Then I'll do this. Then I'll do that. And, it's that whole bartering back and forth with God and not realizing sometimes everything that we have, everything that we do, everything that God has already provided for us. Now, I think one of the other dangers is sometimes we get caught on memory lane. You remember back to, hey, remember back when this was so much easier. I was, back when I was in school and I didn't have all these responsibilities and everything else like that. I also didn't have any income. But that was you forget about those things. And that was, we hear it in Exodus today about the people, and they're in the wilderness. And the wilderness is a tough place, and they have a legitimate need for food. They have a legitimate need for nourishment. But they're beginning to grumble against Moses and Aaron. And what do they say? If only we were back in Egypt. We always had enough to eat there. Yeah, we were slaves, but that's a minor little point about that. We had lots of food back there. And yes, when, the reality is when we're hungry, we don't always make the best decisions. When we're hungry, we don't always think clearly and rationally. When we're truly in need, that things become focused in on, this is what I need right now. And sometimes when you're in that place where this is what I need right now, you don't make the best decisions. But one of the things in both of these readings today, so the reading from John is we heard the first part of this last week where Jesus sees the people and he knows their need and he feeds them. The reading today from Exodus, the people are out there in the wilderness, they're grumbling against Moses and Aaron, but God knows that they need food, and so there's really never a sense of judgment in what God says back to the people. Here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to provide food. I'm going to provide quails in the evening. I'm going to provide bread for you in the morning. But here's the instructions of what you're to do with this bread. There will be enough out there for you to gather what you need. So every day of the week except the day before the Sabbath day, gather what you need for the day. You each need to gather about 2 quarts worth of this. And that'll be enough to sustain you through the day. And so, of course, the first day, everything's out there. What do people do? A lot of people go out and they gather as much as they possibly can, and no matter how hard they work, they end up with about the same amount. And, some people say, well, okay, even though I've gotten the same amount, I need to make sure that there's some left over for tomorrow, because who knows if God's actually going to provide for me tomorrow. And so they try and hold it over tomorrow, and it rots. And then God's given the instruction of, okay, but on the Sabbath day, you're not going to gather. You're going to gather twice as much. There'll be plenty out there. And what do? That day of the Sabbath, they're out there with their gathering baskets, and they're looking, and well, where's the bread? And I think sometimes part of it is learning to live in trust. And that's hard for us. I know, it's hard for me. It's hard to live in that trust that what God is going to provide will be enough. because we hear this other gospel all throughout our week that if you just work more, if you just make more money, if you just find a better job, if you just do all these different things, then you will have more. And even when the people come to Jesus and, he's talking about, I am the bread of life. I'm the one who comes down from heaven. And what do they say to him? What sign are you going to give us? Just after he fed them all the day before. What sign are you going to give us? Show us again. Show us something else. And again, it's almost the, Moses provided manna for our ancestors in the wilderness. Are you going to make bread again? Can you make bread again? That would be really cool. And I do think that part of it is that we want to sometimes turn God and Jesus into Santa Claus. Hey, this is what I need. Can you do this for me? There's nothing wrong with when you pray. Just pray for the things you want. Pray for the things that you ask that are on your heart. But I do think that sometimes it's that whole, but if I don't get what I want, well, then God, you don't love me. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think sometimes it's just that we become blind to that which God has given to us, to all that God puts in our path, to all the things that God does for us. And that God, whether in both of these stories, in the wilderness, God provides for the people in the wilderness. God gives them that which they need. Even though there's nothing there to sustain them, God provides enough for them to get through that stage of their journey. When the people are there with Jesus, Jesus provides for them that one day, but then they come back. They're hungry again, but sometimes they're hungry for the wrong thing. I think one of the other pieces of this that, again, just sometimes how it clicked to me when we were going through the readings, even though I'd worked on them all throughout the week. Sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes as your pastor, I don't feel like I'm enough. And I would guess that a lot of people out there in the various vocations, in the various roles you have, whether it's in work or home, or you don't feel like you're enough. And one of the pieces in the little reading of Ephesians that Paul gives us, God gave to all the people all these various gifts. Some to be evangelists, some to be pastors, some to be teachers, some to be all these different roles, and not one person had all of them. And again, sometimes I'm as guilty as anybody else of looking in the mirror and saying, but I'm not enough. I can't do this, and I don't do this well, and I don't do this. And sometimes I see nothing but the things that I don't do well. And sometimes we become focused in on that. And I forget that this is what God made me. This is what God has created me to be. This is who God made me to be, and this is the gifts that God gives me. To focus in on the things that God has given me. And again, to be grateful for that rather than to be sorrowful for the gifts that somebody else has. Rather than to be sorrowful for what God has allowed somebody else. I think that whole coveting piece, it doesn't just work in relation to things and relationship. It works in relation to those gifts as well. It works in relation to all of that. When the focus is really on Jesus, when the focus is really on God, when that which we need, when Jesus can say, I am the bread of life, I'm that which will sustain you, I'm that which you need, that's what the center of your life is. I think that really does free us to be grateful. Be grateful for that which God has done. Be grateful to look around. When Martin Luther talked about the first part of the Apostles' Creed, where all the things that God created. He also understood this was in terms of here are all the things that God created for us all throughout our lives. Whether it's families or homes or good government or relationships, all these things God provides us of it for us free of charge. That God does this just out of God's pure goodness. This is who God is. And again, one of the things of our church's way of thinking about God is trying to put that emphasis back on, well, look at what God has done. And on the one hand, that should take that emphasis away from, and look at what I haven't. Because ultimately, in the midst of it, the bread of life is enough. that God has given us enough, that God created us as men and women, male and female, in God's image with God's gifts placed within us. And even when we don't want to admit it, even when we can't see it, that we ourselves are enough. That God has given us everything that we need for this step in our journey. That God has given us this day our daily bread. And so, like the people of Israel, there will be times where we don't trust, where we go out and try and gather more than what we need. Just like the people in Jesus' day, when they come to him and they see he's not there, and they go to the other side of the lake to find him, and they come to him and say, that's all great, but can you make bread again? And I think sometimes we're going to miss the mark. We're going to get caught up in either whether it's memory lane, or we're going to get caught up in the various things that we see other people have and that we don't. But today, at least for me, and I think hopefully for all of us, it can be a reminder that this, the psalmist can say, this is a day that the Lord has made, and every single piece of this day is something that the Lord has made. Whether it's the food we eat, whether it's the jobs we go to, whether it's the relationships we have, whether it is our bodies in all the gifts that they have. To be able to say that this is a day that the Lord has made, and today that is enough. I don't have to worry about that which I don't have. That as I go through this journey, God will provide me that which I need. Because God does this out of God's good and gracious love. Thanks be to God. Amen.